What would make a 62-year-old grandmother sell her family's ancestral home in Manila, lie to her children, and fly 6,000 m to meet a 28-year-old man she'd never seen face to face? Rosa Dela Cruz thought she was flying toward love. Instead, she walked into a nightmare that would shake two countries and expose a deadly web of deception. How does a woman who raised 5 children and survived decades of hardship fall victim to the cruelest kind of betrayal? And why did her dream of second chances end in blood? Born Rosa Fernandez in the rural heart of Baton Province in 1962. Life was never easy for her. She married young at just 19 to Antonio Dela Cruz, a hard-working jeepney driver. Together they carved out a modest life, running a small sari store and raising 5 children in the vibrant but humble streets of Manila. Antonio was her rock, the father of her children. They built their world brick by brick, though life always had its struggles. But at 58, the unthinkable happened. Antonio, the man who had always been there, passed away after years of battling diabetes. Suddenly, Rosa was alone with only memories and the weight of responsibility. Her world shifted, leaving her to navigate life with a sense of loss, but still determined to keep her family strong. At 58, Rosa had seen it all: survival, loss, and endless sacrifices. But she wasn't ready to give up on love or life. That was the moment when something unexpected began to stir. A chance for a second act. One she never could have predicted. The house that once echoed with the laughter and chaos of 5 children was now eerily silent. With each photo on the wall, Rosa was reminded of the milestones her children had achieved, their graduations, their weddings. But now they were all far away, scattered across different cities and countries, chasing their own dreams. In Filipino culture, family is everything. So when the children left, Rosa didn't just lose her family. She lost her sense of purpose. The empty nest was a weight that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. The familiar sounds of daily life, meal prep, laughter, even arguments were gone. It didn't help that the whispers of the neighborhood never stopped. Neighbors, well-meaning but nosy, constantly pressed her with questions about finding companionship. When will you start living again, Rosa? They would ask. The pressure was unrelenting. At 62, she wasn't just a mother and a widow. She was now a target for gossip. Labeled as alone and needing something more. Rosa knew she needed something more, but what? What could fill the void? The loneliness was suffocating, and the search for solace began to overshadow everything else. Little did she know this longing would lead her down a dangerous path, one that would change everything. What her children didn't know was that the strong, independent woman who had always been the backbone of their family was slowly drowning in isolation. When they called, she forced a smile, pretending everything was fine. But behind those smiles was a heart weighed down by loneliness, a sadness she couldn't shake. The woman who once filled a house with the warmth of her laughter, her cooking, her endless energy, now spoke only to her plants. The silence of the home echoed in her ears. Her children, busy with their own lives, didn't see the toll it was taking. And Rosa, she didn't want them to worry. She didn't want them to see the emptiness that had become her reality. Every day was a battle to keep the emptiness at bay. Her plants became her companions, her solace, her only source of comfort. But deep down, she craved something more, a connection, someone to talk to, someone who understood her loneliness. And it was in that loneliness, that vulnerability, that she found herself. Drawn to something unexpected, the promise of love, a message from a man she'd never met. A stranger whose words promised the companionship she'd longed for. Little did she know this message would lead her down a path she couldn't turn back from. It started with a simple push from her daughter LSE. "Mom, you need to get on social media. It will help you connect with us more." Rosa hesitated at first. She had spent her whole life in the real world, talking face to face, sharing stories over cups of coffee. The idea of learning to use a smartphone felt foreign, intimidating. But Losa's words lingered, and eventually Rosa decided to try with a few clumsy taps. She found herself in the vast world of social media. Her first stop: Filipino-Australian friendship groups online, where she could connect with other Filipinos living far from home. Just like her children. At first, she just watched, scrolling quietly through pictures, reading updates, and soaking in the lives of people who shared her culture. But as time passed, something changed. The posts became more familiar. The comments became more personal. She began responding, offering words of encouragement, sharing her own experiences. The once hesitant woman found herself becoming more and more active. The digital world was no longer a foreign land. Rosa had discovered something unexpected, a sense of belonging. She wasn't just a mother, a widow, or an empty nester anymore. She was someone with a voice, someone whose words could spark conversations and create connections. And then came the messages. A friend request from a man named Marco, a Filipino-Australian living in Sydney. A simple message at first asking about her life. But those words, those small friendly words, would mark the beginning of a dangerous journey. A journey that began with hope but ended in tragedy. It all began with a ping, a message notification from a name she didn't recognize, Dylan Mitchell. At first, it seemed harmless enough, just another person in one of the many Filipino expatriate support groups Rosa had joined. His profile said he was a construction supervisor in Melbourne, recently divorced. A quick glance and Rosa could see that he seemed like just another expat looking to connect with someone who shared their roots. But there was something about his message that caught her attention. "Your post about missing home-cooked adobo made me smile. My ex-wife was Filipina. And I still crave authentic Filipino food." Dylan's words were simple, but they hit her right in the heart. Adobo, the dish that had been a staple in her home, a flavor that had been passed down through generations. Rosa's heart warmed as she read the message again, imagining what it would be like to share a meal like that, with someone who understood the significance of it. She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. It had been so long since anyone had shown interest in her life like this, since anyone had taken the time to connect over something so deeply personal. Slowly, she typed a reply, her curiosity growing with each word. Little did she know, this small act of kindness would pull her deeper into a web of lies, where trust would be shattered and secrets would come to light. What started as innocent small talk soon turned into something much deeper. Dylan's messages became a constant in Rosa's life. Good morning texts, good night wishes, heartfelt conversations that stretched late into the night. Each day brought something new, each message a promise of understanding, of connection. They shared their stories, their pains, their loneliness. Dylan told her about his failed marriage, his struggles with his ex-wife, and how hard it was to start over. Rosa, in turn, shared her own stories of loss, of the quiet house she now lived in, of missing her children. They bonded over their shared vulnerability, their shared need for something, someone to fill the void. It wasn't just the big things. Dylan remembered the small details. How she liked her mangoes with a sprinkle of beyond. A small but personal touch that made her feel seen. For Rosa, it was more than just a conversation. It was the feeling of being noticed, of being loved for who she truly was, not just the mother or grandmother the world saw her as. And for the first time in years, Rosa felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Desire. Not just for companionship, but for being seen, truly seen. For the woman she was, not the labels placed on her by family or society. Every message, every call, pulled her deeper. She no longer felt alone. Dylan's words became the light at the end of her long, dark days. But what she didn't know was that this was no fairy tale. This was only the beginning of a much darker reality. But Dylan Mitchell was not who he claimed to be. The charming construction supervisor in Melbourne, the man who knew just what to say, was a complete fabrication. The connection she thought she had, the person she thought she knew, was a web of lies carefully crafted to reel her in. It started with small inconsistencies, small details she had overlooked. His background always seemed to change during their calls, flickering like a poorly set-up virtual background. His stories didn't quite add up. And yet, she held on, clinging to the one connection she thought was real. But soon, even her family began to notice. LSE, her daughter, growing concerned over the constant late-night conversations, asked Rosa to share more details about Dylan. That's when the cracks began to show. Rosa began to dig deeper. His social media profile was sparse, too perfect, and the comments from his supposed friends seemed rehearsed. The more she searched, the more the illusion crumbled. There were no friends, no family members, no real life behind the screen, just shadows. And then she found it, a photo of him with a different name. The truth hit her like a punch to the gut. Dylan Mitchell was not a construction supervisor in Melbourne. He wasn't even Filipino. He was someone else entirely, using her loneliness to manipulate her. What had begun as a spark of hope had now turned into a nightmare. The man she trusted, the man who had made her feel alive again, was a stranger, a predator. And Rosa, in her desperate search for connection, had unknowingly walked straight into a trap. His real name wasn't Dylan Mitchell. It was Brett Coleman, a 28-year-old man from Darwin. And the reality was far darker than Rosa could have ever imagined. Brett wasn't a lonely construction supervisor looking for love. He was part of a larger organized romance scam operation that preyed on Filipino women using fake profiles and emotional manipulation to exploit their vulnerabilities. His criminal background was far from spotless. Fraud charges, assault convictions, it all pointed to a man who had a history of exploiting others for his own gain. And now Rosa had become his latest victim. For Rosa, this revelation was like a slap in the face. The man she had opened her heart to was nothing more than a fraud. A con artist. Hiding behind a fake identity. The truth was devastating. Brett wasn't interested in love. He was only after one thing. Money. Every word, every promise, every late-night conversation had been nothing but a lie. A carefully crafted illusion meant to draw her in and strip her of everything she had left. And now Rosa was left to pick up the pieces of her broken trust, facing a betrayal that went far deeper than she could have ever imagined. This wasn't a random act of deception. It was a carefully orchestrated operation. Brett Coleman and those like him had perfected the art of manipulation, targeting vulnerable Filipino women, specifically widowed OFWs with property or savings. To appear authentic, they studied Filipino culture, mimicking everything from language to customs. Brett used stolen photos of a real Australian man to build a fake profile. Every detail of his online persona was designed to make him seem real, trustworthy, and genuine. They specialized in targeting women like Rosa, those who had worked hard all their lives and had something to lose. Women who were lonely, widowed, and often financially stable, owning property or savings, making them prime targets for exploitation. Brett knew exactly how to manipulate his victims. He preyed on their loneliness, the isolation they felt living far from home. He spoke to their need for companionship, for connection, and then just when trust had been established, he played on their financial insecurities. Messages about struggling with bills or a sudden financial crisis would follow. Promises of help, of a brighter future, always something just out of reach. And as they grew more emotionally invested, the requests for money would begin. The scam worked by inching forward, slowly breaking down the victim's defenses. The more money they sent, the more attached they became, believing that this man, this Dylan, was truly in love with them. It was a cycle of psychological manipulation that led to nothing but financial loss, emotional devastation, and a sense of betrayal so deep it would take years for her to heal. Rosa wasn't the only one. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of women were targeted by this operation. Each one a victim in a carefully executed scam that knew exactly how to break them piece by piece. But Brett Coleman wasn't working alone. He was part of a much larger network, a well-organized ring that had been systematically targeting Filipino women across the Philippines. The operation spanned cities and provinces. Each red pin representing a victim, an innocent woman who had fallen for the same lie. Brett's partners in crime were Tommy Chong and Alex Rivera, two men who had mastered the art of deception just like him. Together, they orchestrated this web of lies, each one feeding off the vulnerability of their targets. Knowing exactly who to approach and how to manipulate them, the trio worked systematically, infiltrating Filipino community groups online, where loneliness was often at its peak. Through these groups, they found their victims, women who longed for connection, for a sense of belonging far from home. And it was there in these digital spaces that the scam flourished. Over time, their operation grew more refined, more successful. It wasn't just a small-time scam. It was a multi-million-dollar scheme. Previous victims alone had lost a combined total of $2.3 million AUD money that was never seen again. The impact was devastating, not just financially, but emotionally. Each woman's life was shattered, her trust violated, her sense of security destroyed. For many, the loss was more than just money. It was their dignity, their hope for a future they believed in. Rosa, like so many others, had no idea she was just another pawn in a larger game. One that had already left its marks on countless lives, and one that would continue to operate unless it was stopped. In the beginning, the messages were warm, friendly, and caring. Dylan, Brett in disguise, made Rosa feel special, like she was the only one who mattered. He shared fabricated stories about Filipino culture. Stories he claimed to have learned from his ex-wife, painting himself as someone who truly understood her world. Their video calls felt real, or so Rosa thought. What she didn't know was that these calls were nothing more than illusions crafted using deep-fake technology. Dylan's face, his voice. They were all carefully manipulated, carefully designed to match the man Rosa wanted him to be. To build his credibility, Dylan began sending small care packages, cheap trinkets, little tokens meant to make Rosa feel seen, appreciated, a scarf, a small stuffed animal, Tokens of affection that meant nothing to him, but everything to her. Each package, each small gesture drew her in further. It wasn't about the gifts. It was about the feeling of being remembered, of being cared for. And slowly, the connection shifted from friendly banter to something deeper, more romantic. The tone of their conversations shifted ever so subtly. From one of friendship to flirtation. Sweet words, compliments, and promises of a future together began to flow freely. Dylan wasn't just a man from a faraway place anymore. He was the man Rosa had dreamed of. The man who could fill the void in her life. For Rosa, this was the beginning of a dream. One where she could finally find love again. Where she could feel cherished and valued. But unbeknownst to her, this dream was built on lies, and the truth would soon come crashing down. It all started innocently enough. Casual mentions of financial struggles. Nothing too alarming at first. Dylan's messages began to take a subtle turn. As he spoke of his temporary work visa issues preventing him from accessing the funds he needed. He seemed like a man in a tough spot, someone Rosa could empathize with. The requests started small, but they soon escalated. Dylan told her that without the proper visa renewal, he wouldn't be able to work. And without work, how could he support her? The guilt began to settle in. And before she even realized it, Rosa was making her first transfer. Rosa's first transfer. 25,000 Cuban pesos, sent to help Dylan with his work permit renewal. It was a small amount, but to Rosa, it felt like a step toward something bigger, a step toward supporting the man she thought she loved. But what Rosa didn't realize was that this would be the first of many. The once casual mentions of financial difficulty would soon spiral into a relentless cycle as Dylan's problems deepened, and Rosa's trust in him grew stronger. Each transfer felt like an investment in a future that, unknown to her, would never come. As the days passed, Dylan's messages grew increasingly desperate. His financial issues intensified, and with every new crisis came a new request. The messages, once casual and light-hearted, now carried an urgency, a pressure that Rosa couldn't ignore. First, it was a medical emergency. His sick mother needing urgent care. Dylan painted a picture of despair. His words laced with panic. Rosa, who had always been the caretaker, the one who put others first, couldn't turn her back on him. She sent the money, 50,000 Cuban pesos, for his mother's medical bills. Then came the business opportunity. Dylan claimed to have stumbled upon a lucrative venture, but he needed an investment to make it happen. It sounded so plausible, so promising. It was all too perfect. And Rosa, eager to help, eager to believe in their future together, once again found herself opening her wallet. As the requests grew larger, Rosa began to make sacrifices. She liquidated her jewelry, sold what few valuables she had left, and even borrowed money from relatives. Each time, the story was the same. Just a little more, Dylan would say. This is the last time, I promise. What started as small amounts soon ballooned. 100,000 Cuban pesos. 200,000 Cuban pesos. With each transfer, the weight of the lies grew heavier. But Rosa couldn't stop herself. She was too far in, too invested in the man she thought she loved. By the time the dust settled, Rosa had transferred a staggering total of 2.8 million Cuban pesos or $50,000. Money she had worked her entire life to save. Money that was now gone, lost in a cycle of deceit. And as the final Transfer was made. Rosa's dream of a future with Dylan came crashing down. The truth was clear now. She had been manipulated, drained of everything she had left. But the hardest part was realizing that her love had been used against her, and there was nothing left to hold on to. As Dylan's grip on Rosa tightened, so did his influence over her. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. He convinced Rosa that her family wouldn't understand their love, that they were too quick to judge, too skeptical of someone who truly cared for her. The arguments started small, but they grew more frequent. Rosa, once so open with her children, began to close off. She defended Dylan, even when her daughter Luz questioned his intentions. "You don't understand," Rosa would say, her voice trembling. "He's different. He loves me." Dylan played his part expertly, planting seeds of doubt. He told Rosa that her children, despite their love for her, didn't understand what it was like to be lonely. He told her that they were just trying to pull her away from happiness. And little by little, Rosa began to believe him. Rosa became secretive, defensive about her relationship with Dylan. She stopped sharing details with her children, hiding the truth behind closed doors. What started as a connection based on love and trust had now turned into a prison of isolation. Her children didn't understand. They couldn't see what she saw in Dylan. And that's exactly what he wanted. The more they tried to intervene, the more Rosa withdrew. She became isolated, caught in the web of lies. Her world shrinking to the screen of her phone and the words Dylan fed her. The hardest part, Rosa's heart had become so entangled in the lies that she couldn't see the truth anymore. Her family, the ones who had always been there for her, were now the enemy in her mind. And Dylan had made sure of it. It had been months of late-night calls, endless messages, and promises of a future together. Rosa couldn't help but feel the urge to meet Dylan in person. She was tired of the distance. Tired of only seeing his face through a screen. She believed their connection was real, and it was time to take that next step. One evening, alone in her quiet home, Rosa started browsing flights. Sydney, where Dylan had said he lived, was just a few clicks away. The idea of being with him in person, of feeling his touch, of sharing their love outside the digital confines was too enticing to ignore. She brought it up gently at first. A simple suggestion. "Maybe we should meet," she typed, her heart racing as she hit send. She knew he'd been hesitant, but she also knew that if they were truly meant to be together, this was the next step. Dylan's reply came quickly, but it wasn't the one Rosa had hoped for. He seemed reluctant, citing work commitments, a busy schedule, and various reasons why now wasn't the right time. His words, though polite, felt like an excuse, a barrier keeping them apart. But the more Dylan hesitated, the more determined Rosa became. Her children's skepticism, their warnings about Dylan's intentions, only fueled her desire to make this meeting happen. She was so close to having the life she had dreamed of, so close to making it real. Her family didn't understand. They didn't see what she saw in him. They questioned his sincerity, even suggested that he might not be who he claimed to be. But Rosa couldn't hear them. Every word of doubt they spoke only drove her further into Dylan's world. She needed to prove to herself, to everyone, that this love was real. So, she pressed him again. This time, her message was more direct, more urgent. "I need to see you. This is important to me," she wrote. Her determination was clear, but little did she know, her relentless push was leading her straight toward a crisis. That would change everything. Rosa's dream was taking shape, and she was willing to do anything to make it come true. In secret, she began to plan her journey to Australia, one that would prove to Dylan and to herself that their love was real. She filled out passport applications, each step bringing her closer to the moment she had envisioned for months. Withdrawing money from her account, she felt a strange mixture of excitement and dread. It wasn't just any money. It was everything she had left. Her savings, her nest egg, the years she'd spent working hard to provide for her children. But now it was being converted into cash and travelers' checks for a trip she hadn't told anyone about. But Rosa's plan didn't stop there. In an attempt to make it all happen, she did the unthinkable. She sold her family's ancestral home, the one place that had always connected her to her past. Without telling her children, she transferred ownership to a buyer and received a lump sum in return. The home that held so many memories was now gone, and so was its significance. She booked a 3-week vacation to Australia. It was a story she had carefully crafted, one that would explain her sudden disappearance. She told her children she was going to visit a distant relative, but in reality, it was her final step toward the man she believed could change her life. Her determination was unshakable. Rosa felt the weight of her decisions. But at that moment, it didn't matter. She was convinced that this was her chance to find happiness, to prove to the world and to her children that she wasn't just the matriarch, the caretaker, the grandmother. She was Rosa, a woman with dreams of her own. What Rosa didn't know was that this would be the last time she saw the house that had been the foundation of her family. The next chapter of her life was about to begin. But it would come at a price she couldn't yet comprehend. As Rosa's plans moved forward, so did the darker side of Dylan's operation. Brett and his accomplices, Tommy and Alex, were now under pressure. Dylan's reluctance to meet in person was starting to unravel. Brett had been avoiding her requests for months. But now, with Rosa's insistence growing stronger, the trap was about to spring. Brett began to panic. The woman who had become his source of income was finally determined to meet face to face. And with that came risk. He had to act quickly. He knew that once they met, the ruse would no longer be sustainable. Tommy and Alex, his partners in crime, saw an opportunity. We can milk her dry in person, they suggested, their voices cold and calculating. They weren't interested in love. They were interested in what Rosa could provide. The plan was set into motion. They staged a fake apartment, one designed to look like the home Dylan had described to Rosa. Expensive-looking furniture, photos of friends on the walls, and a carefully crafted life that never existed. It was all meant to deceive, to make Rosa believe she was stepping into the life she had dreamed of. As the days passed, they prepared for Rosa's arrival. Cleaning the place, setting up their act. But their intentions were never about love. No, this was a well-thought-out scheme to rob her completely, to drain her resources until there was nothing left. Rosa, on the other hand, was oblivious to the trap that had been set for her. She believed in their connection. She believed this was the start of something beautiful. But little did she know, the man she thought she loved had been plotting her downfall all along. The plan was simple. Rob Rosa of everything she had left. Then disappear. They would take her money, her trust, and leave her broken. And when it was all over, they would vanish into the shadows, leaving nothing but devastation in their wake. Rosa was about to step into the trap. And with each step she took toward her new life, she was unknowingly walking toward her greatest betrayal. As Rosa moved closer to her destination, excitement mixed with the tension in her chest. Her phone rang incessantly, but Rosa ignored the calls. Calls from her daughter LSE. Calls that would change everything. She was on a mission, one she believed would prove her worth. Prove that she could find happiness again. Back home, LSE had uncovered the truth. The family home, the place where Rosa had raised her children, was gone. In a panic, LSE rushed to the airport, her heart pounding as she tried to reach her mother before it was too late. The sale of the house was the final sign. A sign that Rosa had gone too far. That the woman she once knew was slipping away. But when LSE finally found her mother at the airport, it was too late. Rosa was resolute, her mind made up. "You don't understand true love," she told LSE, her voice firm, filled with a conviction that only the blind could have. LSE on the brink of tears begged her mother to reconsider, to see the danger before it was too late. But Rosa was already too far gone. Her heart, now tangled in lies, was deaf to the warnings. The love she thought she had with Dylan was all that mattered. "When I come back, I'll be married," Rosa said. A hopeful smile on her face, one that LSE couldn't bring herself to share. In that moment, her heart broke. It was a farewell that echoed with finality. The last chance to stop Rosa slipping further into the web of deception slipping through her fingers. And just like that, Rosa left her family behind, convinced that she was stepping into a dream. But the dream was a nightmare in disguise. And her family's final warning would soon prove to be the only truth left in a world built on lies. December 15, 2023. Rosa's long-awaited journey had finally come to fruition. With excitement in her heart and hope in her eyes, she stepped off the plane at Kingsford Smith Airport in Sydney. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the moment when her love story would go from digital to real. She looked around, searching for the man who had promised her the world. She had waited months for this moment. Months of late-night calls, texts filled with sweet promises. And then there he was, Dylan. The man she thought she knew, the man she believed she loved, was waiting for her, or at least someone who looked like him. In reality, it was Brett using another man's identity documents to create the illusion of a man who didn't exist. But to Rosa, he looked like the man from the photos. Warm, welcoming, everything she had imagined. For a brief moment, everything seemed perfect. He was everything she had hoped for. His smile was just like the one in the pictures. His voice just as comforting. The relief washed over her. He looked like him. He sounded like him. The connection she had felt through the screen now felt. He welcomed her with open arms, just as she had imagined. Rosa felt a rush of warmth. This was it. The dream was alive. The man she had fallen for was finally here, standing in front of her. But what she didn't know was that this was the beginning of a nightmare. A nightmare she could never have predicted. For a moment, Rosa allowed herself to believe in the fairy tale. The man who had seemed so caring, so genuine, was a stranger, just another con artist, a part of a sick game she had been dragged into. There was no love, no promises, just lies and betrayal. The realization dawned on her in waves. Everything, her trust, her money, her dreams had been stolen. Dylan wasn't a man in love. He was a predator. And now with the truth laid bare, Rosa was nothing more than a pawn in a ruthless scheme. The horror of it all crashed down on her. She had walked into a trap, and now there was no escape. The dream she had built, the life she had hoped for, was nothing more than a cruel illusion. The weight of betrayal hit her like a tidal wave. Her hands shook, her body frozen in disbelief as she looked at the man who had made her believe in love, only to rip it away in an instant. Brett, the man who had posed as Dylan, stepped forward with a cruel sneer on his face. "Listen, old lady," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're going to give us everything or this gets ugly." Rosa's heart shattered as she stumbled backwards, desperate to cling to the remnants of the love she had thought was real. "Dylan, please, I love you." But Brett's response was as cold as ice. "Dylan doesn't exist," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "I'm Brett, and you're about to be broke." Her world crashed down in that moment. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted with everything was gone. All of it, the promises, the future, the love, had been lies. And now Rosa was left with nothing but the bitter sting of betrayal. And the terrifying truth that her entire life had been taken from her. In a single cruel moment, Brett had shattered Rosa's world. And the worst part, she had trusted him with everything. And now she was about to lose it all. The tension had reached its breaking point. Rosa, cornered and terrified, had no choice but to comply. She transferred the remaining funds in her account, hoping that by giving them everything, she could finally go home. But as she handed over the last of her savings, a chilling realization set in. She demanded her passport back, ready to return home to the Philippines. But Brett's response was cold and final. "You're not going anywhere until we're sure there's no more money left." He sneered, his eyes filled with contempt. The doors to her freedom slammed shut. Rosa, now desperate, made one last attempt. Her trembling hands reached for her phone, the lifeline to her family. To her daughter LSE, who had been the only one to truly see the danger. She called, hoping to hear her daughter's voice, to feel the safety of someone who cared. But before she could get a word out, Tommy's hand was on her phone, ripping it away from her grasp. He slammed it to the ground with a harsh crack, leaving Rosa completely isolated. Panic surged in her chest, her only means of escape crushed in an instant. Rosa screamed for help, her voice filled with terror and desperation. She fought back with whatever strength she had left, pushing and struggling against the men who had betrayed her. But it was futile. She was outnumbered, outmatched, and terrified for her life. What happened next was nothing short of horrific. In the chaos of the struggle, Brett's fury erupted. He grabbed a glass bottle from the nearby table and struck Rosa with it, the sharp edge shattering against her skull. The blow was deadly. Rosa collapsed instantly, her world going dark in a moment of unimaginable violence. In a state of panic, Brett and Tommy fled the scene, leaving Rosa bleeding and dying alone in the motel room. There was no sympathy, no remorse, only fear of being caught. They abandoned her like nothing more than a casualty in their twisted game. 6 hours later, the cleaning staff at the motel discovered Rosa's body. The blood-stained room, the signs of a struggle, told the story of a woman who had fought for her life until the very end. But it was too late. The life that had once been filled with hope, with dreams of love and belonging was gone in the blink of an eye. Rosa had traveled halfway across the world, believing in a love that wasn't real. In the end, she became a victim of the very deception she had trusted. Her life stolen by those who had preyed upon her loneliness and her longing for a second chance. And as the world continued on, Rosa's story became a tragic reminder of the price of misplaced trust. She had been a mother, a grandmother, a woman with dreams. Dreams that were stolen by a world she never fully understood. December 19, 2023, LSE, sitting in the comfort of her home in Manila, received a call that would forever alter her life. The voice on the other end was from the Australian Federal Police. Her mother, Rosa, had been found dead in a Sydney motel. The shock was immediate, the weight of disbelief sinking in with every word. The call confirmed the unimaginable. Rosa's identity was verified through her fingerprints and dental records. A cold confirmation that her mother was gone. Elle's heart shattered and the words murder echoed in her mind. A haunting realization of the nightmare her family had been drawn into. The pain of losing a mother is unbearable. But for LSE, the agony only deepened. She had to travel to Sydney to identify her mother's body, to see for herself what had happened to the woman she loved so much. The journey ahead was both a heartbreaking necessity and a terrible ordeal. The investigation moved quickly, unfolding like a twisted web. The police began piecing together the digital footprints left behind by Brett and his accomplices. Cybercrime units worked tirelessly tracing every message, every transaction that had led to Rosa's tragic fate. Through their work, investigators uncovered the vast scale of the operation. 47 Filipino victims across 3 years, each one drawn into the same cruel trap. And Rosa, she was the first fatality, the first to pay the ultimate price for her trust in a lie. The depth of the scam was staggering. Brett, Tommy, and Alex had operated with ruthless precision, targeting vulnerable women, draining them of everything they had. But it was Rosa's death that finally brought the operation into the spotlight. Justice moved swiftly. Within 72 hours of Rosa's death, Brett Coleman, Tommy Chong, and Alex Rivera were arrested. The evidence seized was staggering. Cuban peso won $15 million from multiple victims. It was clear this was not just a con. It was a crime of unimaginable cruelty. In Brett's apartment, investigators found chilling trophies, personal items taken from the women they had scammed, jewelry, documents, photos, reminders of the lives they had destroyed, trophies that exposed the true extent of their depravity. The trial was a moment of reckoning. LSE took the stand. Her victim impact statement bringing the courtroom to tears. Her words were raw. A testament to the pain of losing a mother in such a senseless, violent way. She spoke of the woman who had been more than a mother, who had been a survivor, a caretaker, a beacon of strength. Brett Coleman, the mastermind behind the operation, sat motionless, showing no remorse as LSE spoke. He had stolen her mother's life and the lives of so many others. And now the weight of his actions would catch up with him. The sentences were harsh but fitting. Brett Coleman received life imprisonment without parole for his role in Rosa's death and the destruction of so many others' lives. Tommy Chong was sentenced to 25 years for manslaughter and fraud. While Alex Rivera, an accessory to the crimes, was sentenced to 20 years. Justice had been served but for Luz. The pain of losing her mother would never truly go away. Her mother's life had been stolen, but her voice, LS's voice, had made sure that the world knew the truth. Rosa's death would not be in vain. And while the legal system had done its part, the real healing for LSE would come from within. The loss of her mother, the life that had been taken so violently, would stay with her forever. But she vowed that her mother's story, her memory, would never be forgotten. Rosa's death left a deep unhealable wound in her family. The funeral held in the Philippines was marked by grief and confusion. An empty chair at the family table stood as a painful reminder of the woman who had been taken too soon, leaving behind memories that could never be replaced. LSE, devastated by the loss, couldn't help but blame herself. She had tried to warn her mother to stop her from going to Australia, but her pleas had been ignored. The guilt of not preventing the trip weighed heavily on her heart. She wondered over and over if there was more she could have done. Rosa's other children were also consumed with guilt, their hearts torn between anger at their mother for not listening and sadness over the loss of a parent they couldn't protect. The family had lost not just their matriarch, but also the financial security that had once come from the family home and savings. The financial devastation was equally devastating. The ancestral home, a symbol of their family's history and pride, had been sold in Rosa's absence. The money she had worked so hard for was gone, lost to the very criminals who had manipulated her. Rosa's tragic death did not go unnoticed. The case sparked a wave of awareness campaigns aimed at preventing similar tragedies from occurring. Governments both in the Philippines and Australia took action, stepping up their efforts to protect vulnerable adults from online scams. The case prompted new Filipino-Australian cooperation on cybercrime, with law enforcement agencies from both countries working together to track and shut down romance scam operations. Enhanced screening processes were put in place, making it more difficult for scammers to prey on vulnerable individuals. In honor of Rosa, the Philippine government enacted Rosa's Law, a legislative change aimed at offering stronger protections for vulnerable adults navigating online spaces. The law brought stronger regulations for online dating platforms, ensuring that people like Rosa would be better protected from fraudulent schemes. But the tragedy didn't stop there. It was part of a much larger problem. Romance scams targeting Filipino women had skyrocketed in recent years, with incidents increasing by 340%. Since 2020 alone, the average age of victims was between 45 and 65. Women who, like Rosa, were often lonely and seeking companionship after years of hardship. Rosa's story was just one of many. Thousands of women had been deceived, manipulated, and drained of their life savings by the same ruthless tactics. The total financial losses from Filipino romance scam victims had reached a staggering $2.8 billion annually, a haunting reminder of the scale of the crime. Rosa's death was a tragic turning point, but her story has since become a warning to the world, a reminder that the consequences of online deception are far-reaching and devastating, and that the fight to protect the vulnerable must continue. Rosa's life was taken too soon, but her legacy lives on in the changes she helped bring about. Through her story, countless others have been saved from the same fate. And while her family will never fully heal from their loss, they know that Rosa's memory will never be forgotten. Rosa Dela Cruz wasn't naive or foolish, she was human. She wanted what we all want: to be loved, to matter, to not be forgotten. She wanted to feel seen and valued after a life filled with sacrifice. In the end, that desire for connection led her down a path she could never have anticipated. Rosa's story isn't just about one woman. It's about us all. The lesson here is simple. Open communication with our families is essential. It's important to create spaces where our loved ones feel they can talk about their loneliness, their fears, and their hopes without fear of judgment. Romance scams thrive on isolation and secrecy. By fostering trust, we can help prevent others from falling into the same trap. Understanding the warning signs of romance scams is crucial. Whether it's too fast intimacy, requests for money, or the use of emotional manipulation, these are all red flags. Being aware can help us intervene in time before someone is hurt, and we must be culturally sensitive in how we address loneliness in Filipino families and communities. Especially when long distances or cultural expectations make it hard to talk about emotional struggles. This story is one we must share, especially with families we know. If you recognize these warning signs, speak up with love, not judgment. Encourage your loved ones to talk, to share, and to trust that they are not alone. Subscribe to stay informed about stories that matter, and share this video so others can learn from Rosa's tragic experience. Together, we can prevent another Rosa. Let's keep the conversation going and make sure that no one has to face the darkness of betrayal alone. Rosa's dream of love became a nightmare that crossed oceans. But her story can be the light that guides others away from the darkness. Let her memory be a reminder that love should never come with a price.